Discouragement from the new global situation is officially setting in, and people are wondering, how is it affecting missions, and what can we do to stay missional?
Psalm 96. It's this great psalm about a call to declare the glory of the Lord amongst the nations, right? But that psalm it's an encouragement to sing. And I think one of the best things that we as believers could be doing right now is singing through this. There's nothing that's going on right now that is outside of the watchful eye of our wonderful Lord, and He is working out His redemptive plan in humanity.
ABWE President Paul Davis today on the show. Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Advancement and Mobilization, joined again by Scott Dunford, West Coast Mobilizer and lead church planter for Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. Scott, I don't say begrudgingly the word again. I truly mean it. I enjoy being joined by you again.
I don't know, man.
Or am I joining you, or are you joining me, or are we just joining each other?
Well, the mothership is Pennsylvania, so I think I'm always joining you since you are Pennsylvania through and through.
I don't know if that's a compliment coming from you.
I don't know if it is either, but I said it and you have to own it. So
okay, I'll take it. I'll own it. I am PA through and through. I'm a weird combination of Philadelphia, but also Pennsylvania. So I'll own that. But speaking of Pennsylvania, we've got another guest here with us today, Paul Davis, our president, our fearless leader of ABWE. We've tried to work this in more regularly. We want to have a constant uplink with Paul. We love our conversations together, whether it's about the practical side of the mission, whether it's about theology and some of the things that we hold in common. But what I'd love to do is just informally start sort of a conversation. We were already having a conversation before we came on the line together. And yesterday, first of all, I got to brag on my pastor a little bit. His name's Wes. So shout out to Wes if he happens to be listening. But he's a stand-up guy as far as a pastor goes. And we had Chick-fil-A hand-delivered by our pastor to our driveway yesterday for dinner, which just couldn't have come at a better time because what is today? Friday? We've had about 3 or 4 Mondays in a row this week. So having that as a gift was really just God's grace working through him. And but it got me thinking about what pastors are facing right now. Because seeing my pastor face to face, not on a Zoom call for the first time in several weeks, maybe it's just the passing of time and it happens normally. But man, he looked tired, and I think a lot of us are tired, whether you're a pastor or not. But I could see a few new gray hairs, or I could see his COVID haircut coming through, or lack thereof. But what it also comes down to is, we were talking about what his day looks like. And it makes sense. He could probably guess what his schedule's like. It's now that he's home, he has a little bit more margin to be with the kids and, wrestle them around and play with them. But somehow he's actually more busy with Zoom calls with congregants and care and counseling. And as people are all locked together in the same homes, that exasperates relational issues. And so there's more time spent in pastoral counseling. And so he's on Zoom, 6-7 hours a day, and still trying to find time to do sermon prep and all of that. And, it's the new normal, if you want to call it that, is weird. It's weird for pastors. And we were just talking about what that looks like, not only for pastors, but for the mission itself. Paul, what's it been like for you lately, man? You were a world traveler up until very recently, and things have kind of calmed down for you a little bit.
Well, we've officially been grounded. That's for sure. And, part of what we love about our role is getting to interact with those who support missionaries, those who send missionaries, being with pastors and churches that are trying to disciple people. And we've loved that aspect of our job, and that has largely just shut down completely in person. But it's been fun to see how we use technology and phone calls. I've talked to people on the phone more than I have in years, quite honestly. Texting people and calling pastors and leaders and individuals. And I was on the phone today with a pastor who was sharing how ministry has changed for him. And he was sharing along the lines that you said, Alex, that he has time for one-on-one pastoral ministry like he didn't have before. He was so busy running programs that he didn't have time to do individual care. And he was sharing with me a visit he was able to make with someone, and he was able to read scripture and sing with them and spend literally hours. And he said it was some of the best ministry he's been able to do in a long time. And that happened because he had margin that he didn't have before.
What has it been like for you? I mean, you guys were going, at 110 miles an hour, and then basically everything came to a screeching halt. I mean, as leading a large mission, how does your life change? I mean, people probably don't know what a president normally does. So, what was your life like before? And then how does your life just change suddenly with all that's going on with this?
I think the biggest change has been Sunday mornings. We were speaking out quite a bit and traveling. So we would travel on the weekends, spend time with pastors and churches and missions committees, and preaching on Sunday morning and possibly Sunday night or on a Saturday night. And that is completely stopped. So, it would be nice for that to have stopped and me been able to go to church, right? So that's really stopped. And now we are like most people, we're doing church online and interacting that way. And that's been great in respects of being able to see what churches and pastors are doing around the country that support ABWE and that work with us. And so that's been good in some respect, but it's been very different. Having free weekends. That's a new thing. I went straight from pastoral ministry where no weekend was free, right?
Yeah.
To presidential ministry, which again, no weekend was free. And now all of a sudden Saturday night comes and I'm feeling good, but I wake up in the middle of the night with these terror sweats, like my sermon's not ready for tomorrow morning. Right.
Right.
And I don't have one. So that's very unique and different for us.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And, instead of flying every week somewhere in the world, you're just home.
Right.
That's gotta be a huge adjustment.
It has been. And in some ways it's been good. Traveling as much as we have, I've personally enjoyed the time where now that I can get up in the morning, I like to get up early and I like to read and pray and sit in my chair and drink coffee. And, when you're in a hotel room or in somebody else's home, you can't do that as much. Right. So I've enjoyed that. It's been sweet times with the Lord early in the mornings.
So one thing that we were talking about before we started recording, you and I, Paul, due to our closeness to the headquarters here and the things we're involved in, we're getting updates all the time from every direction from various missionaries. And we know where the hotspots are in the world and where the hotspots aren't in the world, politically, economically, in terms of the health crisis. And Scott has the advantage of, even though the Bay Area out there is something that's it's something that's been in the news a lot. At the same time, he's not hearing that from every direction. I mean, what are you hearing, just you personally, Paul, about missionaries across the world and how they're facing some of these things right now?
The one word that I would say would be creatively, right? There's no two missionaries that are really doing this quarantining and COVID-19ing the same way. Each one is handling it, their families differently, handling their ministries differently. And I continue to be surprised by how creative of ministry from making things to to being a delivery man, to checking in on neighbors, and ministry continues to go on. I would encourage our listeners to pray for missionaries around the globe. It's a different type of thing to quarantine with your family at home with a support system than it is to quarantine by yourself in an expat situation, right, where you're in a foreign country and you're somewhat dependent possibly on national partners, or you're dependent on your co-laborers that are serving with you. And so I would encourage people to pray for them. They're doing well. I think everyone is in place and doing well, but there's an added pressure that we may not feel being in our own context.
I'm sure there's the pressure of just wondering, how are my supporters doing even financially? I mean, there's a lot of insecurity about jobs and the job market and everything like that. And of course, healthcare kind of comes into that. If you get COVID, can you afford the healthcare? And then overseas, there is a missionary. It's very much dependent on, are my supporters going to be able to keep their jobs? So that creates a whole nother level of potential anxiety. What are you seeing? I'm seeing on the internet all sorts of stuff. I mean, aren't we one mission leader posted, that's a loaded comment, but about missions in general and nonprofits. One mission leader, Darren Carlson, who's obviously a friend of the show and of us, was posting about, organizational leaders and what they're expecting as far as, drop offs. Are you hearing that from our missionaries? Are they hurting financially right now? Are the majority of them keeping their support levels up, or has it been a real trial from what obviously each individual is very different, but on the whole, what are you seeing?
We have been encouraged at ABWE with the faithfulness of both our donors and the churches that are supporting missionaries. We have not seen a large decline in giving and support. There are pockets, though, right? So there's an overall picture, right? We have over 1,000 missionaries around the globe. Overall, the giving is steady, but we do have individuals who have individual needs and who have taken dramatic hits. Maybe one or two givers, or one or two donors, or one or two churches have dropped out on them. And was talking to one missionary who said a church was dropping them, 15%. Well, that doesn't sound like much, but if 2 or 3 churches do that, that can have a dramatic impact.
Yeah.
On the encouraging side, though, we've had some churches. We had one church the other day that did what they're calling a double down, and I'd never heard of this before, but I loved it. And they decided that because of their missionaries had communicated some needs to them, that they said, hey, we're going to double down this month. And for this month, we're going to double our support for our missionaries. And so they did like a double down Sunday or something like that. But missionaries felt not a drop in their support, but this one church's support actually doubled for that month. So just like God always does, right? In the midst of what can be scary and trying times, his people come through with ways to bless missionaries and
awesome.
And to support people. So, again, I would ask prayer, because there are some missionaries who won't be encouraged by this, right? Because they're experiencing, man, I've lost support from 3 or 4 churches, and they're experiencing that. And but again, we're overall encouraged, and we're praying for some individuals. And we have had the opportunity to help some individual missionaries who have seen, for one reason or another, a dramatic decrease in their support.
Is there more giving to projects like the hospitals and those kind of things? What are you seeing with that? Is that been up, or has that been steady or dropping way off? Because, we know just from talking to Jody a few episodes ago, there's a huge need in the hospitals that we've got in the medical ministries and things like that without short-termers coming. Has giving to those kind of projects stayed steady, or has that changed at all?
Well, I think we're a little early to track a trend, right? But
sure.
The short-term missions aspect of our medical missions is huge, and that can't be overstated enough. That we have a real need for short-term medical missionaries to engage in our hospitals, and so if we have any medical personnel, whether nurses or PAs or doctors, or our teams have need for short-termers because some of our medical people have been retired medical people, and they may not have been able to travel, and of course travel has shut down. So in that way, I think those projects are hurting. Financially, we haven't seen a huge drop off, but it may be too soon to know really what's happening financially, right? A lot of our hospitals get gifts sporadically. So we haven't gone long enough to know whether sporadically that's completely dropped off. Right now, things look solid, but who knows what's going to happen in May and June.
Oh, sure.
Right. So we're prayerful.
Well, Paul, that's the mission side, but I also want to hear what you would be doing right now if you were still a pastor. So we'll dive right back into that as soon as we take this short break. A special message from ABWE President Paul Davis.
ABWE missionaries are coming beside the lost and the hurting around the world. And through the Global Gospel Fund, they're pulling people from the darkness and training them as leaders. They're planting churches, and they're even beginning their own missions movements. You may already support one ABWE missionary. Would you consider a gift to the Global Gospel Fund to support all 1,000 of our missionaries? Thank you for that.
Become a partner today at abwe.org/Global Gospel Fund.
Hi, I'm Scott Dunford, and I would like to share with you about a new nonprofit ministry established to help churches, Christian schools, and other ministries protect children and prevent abuse. Rich Hamar from Church Law and Tax states that the #1 reason that drives churches to court is child sexual abuse. I can't think of anything more devastating to these lives, their families, and our witness before a watching world than sexual abuse that takes place in ministry. The traumatic impact often leaves the vulnerable not wanting anything to do with God or His people. Furthermore, as ministry leaders, our efforts toward evangelism, discipleship, and spiritual formation are not only neutralized, but shattered. Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention was formed last year to help ministry leaders understand the complexities of child protection and abuse prevention. They are establishing standards and an accreditation program that will help verify that appropriate measures are in place at your church or ministry. Learn more about them and their good work at abuseprevention.org. Find a helpful and free assessment tool to help you see how you measure up in this area. Go to abuseprevention.org and click on the link for this resource assessment. Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. Pray for them and follow along for this accreditation program coming soon.
Brooks Buser, president of Radius International.
Today I have the privilege of having a conversation with Ian Hamilton, board member of the Banner of Truth and a professor at Greenville Presbyterian Seminary.
I find it hard to express this, but the brief time over the last 2 years that I've had in contact with Radius has been a signal moment, actually, in my Christian life for myself and my wife, Joan. But to see young lives gladly giving themselves to decades of language study, culture acquisition, knowing that it may take 5, 10, 15 years before they can meaningfully set before this language group the grace and love of God in Jesus Christ. That's just been very moving for me, and I regularly am thankful to God for the privilege of having a little contact with Radius.
Go to radiusinternational.org, radiusinternational.org.
And we're back with Paul Davis, president of ABWE. One of the things that really the three of us share is that we have the heart of, being churchmen. You have a pastor's heart. And I know that's always where your heart is, even though you're doing something different in ministry now. Obviously, you still approach it through a certain lens that way. And I'm just curious, like, what does this do for your soul? What would you be doing if you were a pastor currently? Whether it's gathering online or, hey, maybe I'm going to gather in person, or as far as we would support our missionaries, or we would try this or that, or just along those lines. I'm just curious that as you think about that, what's on your heart?
Largely what's on my heart has been, as I've been talking with pastors and what they've been sharing with me. Ministry is very different. I'm surprised at how the creative juices have been flowing. Pleasantly surprised, right? How the creative juices have been flowing, and how creative pastors have been to even to teach differently and to work with their people differently. I've been praying for a lot of the men that I know that are on my heart, that God would give them time for specifically families that have lost loved ones, that are doing funerals. My pastor's heart, I love my people, and there have been a couple people that I've been close to that have died recently. And, I've been thinking to myself, how, if I had been asked to do their funeral and they can't gather together and they can't grieve like we're normally grieving, and how do you shepherd hearts of families who, hundreds of people would be at their funeral, hugging them and going through a reception line and encouraging them and crying with them, and now many of the people are doing graveside services where people have to drive by in their cars and just wave, and that's, I think of every pastor that has to do a funeral right now. And I know there are many of them, and how do you do that well? And I'm just praying that God would give them just eyes to see and ears to hear how to comfort these families and be with them when you can't be with them, and encourage them when you can't hug them, and cry with them and break bread with them. Right. And we need great shepherds right now to help families do that well. And that's just one aspect, but that's one that's heavy on my heart with when we hear death numbers every day, right?
What are you seeing as far as, like, I can speak as a pastor. So, and we've already kind of addressed this a little bit. Like, the schedules are weird, the days kind of blend into one another. You really miss the gathering of believers. And certainly when you talk about, sure, every continent, every country in the world is kind of dealing with their own version of that. I read two prayer letters this morning, one for both of them from Central Asia, countries that have stands in their last names. And it just kind of shocked me in a weird way. Like, oh, okay, even in these really remote mountain regions of Central Asia, they're still quarantining, and a lot of it, they're quarantining not even necessarily because the government is telling them to, just out of fear. And what are some of the? Are you hearing anything from our missionaries that is encouraging you in the way that they're responding to this? I know you mentioned they were doing some. You've seen creativity. Is there anything particular that, or even a story or two that you're hearing that is just encouraging you, or maybe another way of approaching this is like, has the mission changed at ABWE, or are we just finding new ways to fulfill the mission?
No, the mission hasn't changed, right? We are Christ's ambassadors, ambassadors proclaiming the gospel. Again, the word that I would use would be creative. It's very encouraging to see the creative ways that missionaries are using their time. There are some hot spots in the world. There are some spots that that Alex alluded to, that we are praying about, and that we are actively working with our missionaries on, that perhaps needing to get people out or move people. Largely, our missionaries have landed where they're going to land to quarantine, whether they're staying in country or move to another country or even come back to the United States. But ministries are still going on.
One of the cool stories that I've heard recently comes from one of our missionaries in South Asia. And man, I think it's so easy for us to, I think the first week or two into this quarantines and everything, there was a lot of energy around, get out, see your neighbors more and be creative. And I was sensing more of that energy. Maybe it's just me, but I think, 50, 60 days into this, that energy's gone. And it's really like, okay, I'm ready to be done with this. And I imagine that a lot of missionaries are feeling that same thing. But one of the encouraging stories from South Asia is a missionary who is undergoing cancer treatments, veteran missionary. And here's something that he wrote, and I believe you've seen this story, Paul. So I'll withhold some of the the names of specifics for security purposes. But he wrote, we've also seen that God can still use us to help spread the good news, not just here in the U.S. because he's receiving treatment, but also in South Asian country. We may not be able to go in person, but as Paul said in 2 Timothy 2:19, I may be in chains, but God's word is not bound. That's a good verse to meditate on. Recently, I was able to post a couple of devotionals for the Easter season in South Asian language on YouTube. We just heard that it was broadcast over loudspeakers from the church in the village near our hospital. It has been forwarded around the country, and one of our tribal friends even sent the link to his coworkers in India, somewhere in India. Some coworkers wanted to show it to one of our Muslim employees. He told them that they had already seen it. Not only that, but his teenage sons had all watched it as well. Had I preached that sermon in the country, they would never have heard it. God is taking his word places where it never would have been. And he goes on from there. It's amazing. He even shares stories of salvation, people turning who had previously been involved in the occult, just powerful things happening that way. But here's a question, man, what's filling your soul right now? Whether it's maybe you just have time to read more and meditate in the word more, or maybe it is stories like that. What's filling your soul? What's keeping you going?
Yeah, that's one story. And there are many others like that, Alex, that we've heard. And let's just take this small bandwidth of creativity, which is missionaries and pastors putting their sermons online that currently didn't have them online. Even people that have a small online presence, right? Like they don't have 1,000 people watching their sermon on a Sunday morning or their devotional that they're putting on. One of the things that we're hearing is stories of people of other faiths, Muslim people, Hindu people, who would never darken the door of the church, but because they know a believer and that believer has posted something online or something on Facebook, and they've shared their faith and they've shared their devotional, now there's a touch that's happening where this person might not have ever looked at a megachurch. They would have never looked at someone who's doing this social media thing in a big, huge megachurch way. They will watch the family that they know down the street who has served them and has loved them from afar, and now they've posted something close by. And we are seeing fruit like that, and that encourages me. That there's a spot for everyone who can do social media really well and post a sermon that has high technical value and lights and cameras and things like that, but also the godly woman who posts a devotional that she's doing online. There's a place for all of that, and God is using all of that, and we probably wouldn't have had as much of that, right? We know we wouldn't have If this hadn't have been a catalyst, the COVID-19 hadn't catalyzed all of this engagement with video and online. So that's feeding my soul.
Well, and, that makes me think back to what precipitated the Reformation. It was not only the invention of the printing press, but it was in the wake of Black Death all throughout Europe. And there's tons of differences between our situation and theirs that would take forever to enumerate. But it was tragedy and it was new technology. And you think, well, what would be happening worldwide in terms of ministry if we didn't have social media, if we didn't have some of these things to connect us? And that's as someone who's saying, man, I'm ready to get back to church yesterday, but you can't replace the flesh and blood presence of God's people together, gathered in person. But it does make you wonder, what is God preparing to do through all of this? And is he going to use not only the tragedy and the global upheaval, but also the entirely new level of communication to spread the gospel in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise?
Yeah, that's a good comment. If I can just play off of Scott, those are some of the encouraging things. One of the things that I think about a lot too are the fears that are going on in those who are working as missionaries, those who are faith-based, right? And they are concerned for their works in cross-cultural context, but also for their churches at home.
Yeah.
And they're praying for their church to be healthy. And they're concerned what's going on with my sending church and my supporting church, and is that going well? And so there's this mutual concern. We're concerned about the workers that are overseas. Our overseas people are also concerned for churches that support them, that they'll be creative and do well during this time as well.
It's just a good reminder to realize that, no matter what man or just the fallen effects of our sinful world bring toward us, that none of these things are outside of God's control. I was just reading this morning, in my morning devotions in the book of Genesis about Jacob and Laban and all the schemes of man, that Laban's trying to, and not just Laban, Jacob scheming, Laban scheming, Rachel scheming. It seems like the only one not scheming is Leah, and all these schemes. And then every single scheme that's tries to be devised, God still ends up turning it toward blessing his people and accomplishing his redemptive purposes. And this is going to be one of those things that we'll look back in 100 years. Well, Lord willing, I won't be looking back, but others on earth, if Christ tarries, will be looking back and going, these are things that God started to do during this, COVID-19 season that, that seemed out of control, seemed against God's purposes, seemed so frustrating in the moment, and yet look at what came out of this. And just praying that we'll be able to see that in our own days. Those are, it's a unique privilege to be able to do that.
And if I could encourage our listeners, one of the things that I would share, not only is God not going to be thwarted by our schemes and will actually use those schemes, but I was looking at Psalm 96, and it's this great psalm about a call to declare the glory of the Lord amongst the nations, right? But that psalm is really, it's an encouragement to sing. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. And I think one of the best things that we as believers could be doing right now is singing through this, right? Like there's nothing that's going on right now that is not outside of the watchful eye of our wonderful Lord. And he is working out his redemptive plan in humanity. And there is nothing that's going to thwart that. And so I think that we can sing a new song to the Lord and sing a song to all of the earth and bless his name and still tell of his salvation from day to day, right? And as we serve. We can talk about doing ministry creatively, but I think this is deeper, right? This is attitudinal, right? This is outlookish. This is our worldview shining forth that we are continually singing to the Lord day to day, these songs of his salvation, these marvelous works that he's done, his greatness and his glory and his fearsomeness. Our song shouldn't cease, right? Our song doesn't change. That should still be the song of our life, even in this time.
I love that, because I was listening to someone today who was in this similar place of exhaustion and was saying, yeah, I've been doing the church online thing, but I'll admit we haven't been singing along with the worship. We've just been watching, because it's a very passive experience. And I get that. Watching, especially some people are doing live music. We've been doing, just for us personally, pre-recorded, kind of like lyric videos on YouTube. It doesn't exactly pull you in as far as congregation participation. But this is where, one thing that's been on my heart is we do need courage in this time. And that doesn't mean, go out and lick every doorknob and ignore wisdom with regard to public health. But there is so much fear. And what's needed is not just quiet trust, but what's needed is courage. And let's face it, we're all pretty fat and happy as Americans in general. And we need things like this to shake us up and wake us up and get us to realize, like, you know what? The Christian life involves risk, and it means going out and saying things that are true that no one will like, whether it's gospel or whether it's the implications of the gospel. And what you're saying about singing, to me, man, that's going to be my biggest takeaway from this conversation, because worship is warfare. Psalm 149:6, let the high praises of God be in their throats and two-edged swords in their hands. And you look even out in the world, and the one thing that we're not allowed to do is gather corporately and sing. And, you might want to debate the politics on that. Obviously it's wrong, but the reality is when God's people do get to gather, it is powerful. That is spiritual warfare. That's when we are able to push back on the powers of darkness. That's when we're able to refresh our hearts. That's when we're able to say to a world that's gripped with fear, we know someone that is more worth fearing than any economic shutdown, than any pandemic or plague.
Yeah, worth fearing, worth praising, worth relishing and enjoying, worth getting to know, right? There's so much worthiness about him in so many different areas. Yeah, that's good, Alex.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for making time to join us. I think this was an encouragement. I hope it's an encouragement to those listening. And again, what are some ways that people can reach out to you, or, maybe since you're kind of a familiar voice on our show, what are some ways that people can get involved in giving and supporting the work of ABWE?
Well, one of the best ways that folks can get involved financially is by supporting your favorite missionary. If you know an ABWE missionary, I would encourage you to support them. A surprise gift from you during this time will be will be received well, right? But also supporting the Global Gospel Fund. That's a fund that we use that supports every area really of our ministry, that we're supporting missionaries and helping churches to send missionaries. And that would be a tremendous gift. I would also encourage, if you're considering missions, to check out our website at abwe.org. There are so many resources there for you to, one, be encouraged as an individual, as a believer, but also to see, what next steps should I be doing in my personal life right now? What are ways that I should be thinking or preparing if God were to call me? But then also taking very practical next steps. And how do I begin a conversation? And we have people at our headquarters that would love to talk with you about how to start that journey towards what could be a cross-cultural ministry for you. And so engage in the blog, abwe.org, and to the blog, but also there's a host of resources there that they could get involved in. Those would be the two easiest, Scott, that I would say jump into those areas and you'll be encouraged.
Well, and while you're at it, make sure that you subscribe to the Missions Podcast. That helps us get our content in front of more people. We hear the algorithms favor that. Subscribe, rate, review, and let other people know that you're listening, that you like it. And let's get this in front of more people so that we'd pray that God would use it to bless people and also for more laborers to be sent out into the harvest. Paul Davis, President of ABWE International. Thanks for joining us today. To get more content, go to missionspodcast.com or check out abwe.org/podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share. To ask a question or suggest a topic, email alex@missionspodcast.com, and we'll see you next time on the Missions Podcast.